this would be a summary of a paper that was recently published in Artificial Life Journal with the same title. So you can read the paper if you're interested in more details. And I feel that I'm preaching to the converted. So let's say, I mean, the main message of the paper is that we can understand emergence and complexity better if we study ALIFE and also in general living systems. So in a similar way, ALIFE can help us understand better emergence and complexity. So, I mean, concept of emergence, I guess it's familiar for most of us. Some similar concepts could be traced back to Aristotle when he was saying, for example, that the sum is greater than the parts. In the 19th century, or even a bit before, with John Stuart Mill, the so-called British emergentism was developed, which was a philosophical current, but reductionism prevailed with the success of molecular biology and in general of reductionism. So yeah, it kind of faded away for a few decades until the scientific study of complexity began in the mid-80s, precisely because of computers. As Hans Pagels wrote, we can see computers as telescopes of complexity. So it's very difficult to study emergent phenomena without these tools. And I mean, even before in physics, for example, Phil Anderson, in his famous paper, More is Different, he was noticing that, for example, we can know properties of atoms of gold, or but this will not tell us its conductivity, malleability, and other macroscopic properties. Or also we can know the properties of carbon atoms, but they can be arranged in different ways, meaning that their organization can change, and this will lead to different macroscopic properties. But I'll speak more about interactions and organization. And also, we can add to the ontological question whether emergence is real or just an epiphenomenon. And of course, there's a big discussion, but we could argue that at least it has causal influence in the physical world. And of course, there's no great definition of emergence, but neither life, intelligence, consciousness, and so on. And anyway, in all of these fields, there are significant advances in recent decades. And I like a quote of Mandelbrot. He wrote, "Being ill-defined is a feature common to all the important concepts." So I guess the same applies to emergence. If we don't have a proper definition, it means it's an important concept. However, I'll put forward a notion that I've been using, that is generally enough, that other understandings of emergence can be seen as particular case of this, and it's simply information that is present at one scale and not at another scale. So it's very general, and it's not like all or nothing definition in the sense that you can have different degrees of emergence. To distinguish it related to complexity. So complexity, we can say that occurs when new information is produced through interactions at the same scale, and emergence can be said to occur when novel information is produced across scales. So it's certain complementarity. And we can also mention different flavors of emergence. So synchronic, well, that's the name, but we could also call it spatial or structural. Basically, when structures appear in space, then we can call this synchronic emergence. Diachronic, it means that they appear in time. Most people are comfortable with weak emergence, that, for example, the gliders in the Game of Life or other observed phenomena at different scales, they could be called weakly emergent. Strong emergence is a bit more problematic because it implies downward causation. Some people don't believe in downward causation, and yep, I'll speak more about this later. And most people, when they speak about emergence, they refer to upwards emergence, meaning that new information occurs at higher scales, but we can also identify downwards emergence where new properties appear at the lower scale. Sorry, new information. And of course, we can relate it to life in general and artificial life in particular. And I mean, as we know, artificial life focuses more on organization and properties rather than the substrate of systems, which is the tradition that began with cybernetics, and also applies the synthetic method, meaning that we try to build systems in order to understand them. And also, this could be seen as part of general biology to understand life not only as the one instance that we have in our planet, but more generally what makes living systems in general. And we can classify soft, hard, and wet ALIFE. Soft is, of course, in software. So one particular case of emergence that has been vastly studied is open-ended evolution. It's okay, how can you get novelty depending on different interactions? This would be more diachronic emergence. And I mean, for example, in the game of life, you have emergent structures, and also you can build universal Turing machines. So any computable function can be implemented in the game of life. Of course, it's not trivial to program this with machines, but say we can do this, and most people will agree that this certain weak emergence, in the sense that universal computation is weakly emergent from the basic rules of the game of life. I mean, this video is just a construction of the game of life in the game of life. So it's just something you can do. So you have these spaceships, and there's some circuitry, and they're computing something, and that something is the game of life itself. Another example, it's Craig Reynolds Boyd's, that in the group of Takashi, they did flocks of about 500,000 Boyds, and then you get all these very interesting structures. So not only the flocks, but this kind of, I don't know, dendrites. I don't know how to call them, but I mean, we could also say that these are emergent structures, because it's information that it's not at the lower scale, but it's at the higher scale. And then in hard ALIFE, it's naturally embedded in an environment, I mean, in robots. And examples of emergence, we can say that the behavior is emergent, interacting through the environment. And examples of this would be Grey Water tortoises from 70 years ago, Breitenberg vehicles from 40 years ago, but also in collectives, in organisms and societies. And it's just an example of swarms of robots, and there are many others where you have, let's say, emergent properties at the collective level. And for wet ALIFE, of course, this is based on chemistry, protocells or droplets. There we can have emergence from chemistry to life or proto-life, but also the collective level, have emergence from the interactions of protocells or doublets to some collective patterns. And I mean, there have been a few examples presented this week. And also xenobots could be seen as an example of wet ALIFE. And this is just an example from Jitka, that you can say that these macroscopic patterns emerge from the chemical reactions. And all of this should be better understood if we start with information. So reading one of Stuart Kaufman's books, I believe it was Investigations, he posed the problem of relating information and meaning of that information with matter and energy. And I mean, it's very problematic. So one alternative is to start with information and then see matter and energy as particular types of information. So then it has lots of advantages. You don't fall into dualisms. And I think that if we want to understand emergence, we need to use a framework that considers information, because these emergent properties are basically patterns of organization rather than physical properties of a substrate. So it's simply a more appropriate language to describe it. And of course, it's partly subjective, but quoting Schrödinger that Tom recently mentioned, basically, we cannot distinguish between object and subject because you need a subject to describe an object, and of course, you need an object to have a reliable subject. And we can describe emergence in terms of information as actually this Shannon's information. This applies to diachronic or synchronic, weak or strong. And there are many other measures of emergence, but I mean, the argument here is not convinced of a particular measure of emergence, simply to use it as an example to better understand the concept of emergence. And I mean, Shannon information already can tell us how much information a process produces. And then there are different ways and more refined and sophisticated ways of identifying new information that is present at one scale and not at another scale. This is how many groups have measured emergence. And again, if we have a physicalist worldview, then we can run into problems, but in terms of information, it's much more natural. What's more arguable is whether this can be also used to describe downward causation in sense of information produced at different scales. And emergence is also related to self-organization. I mean, we have examples of self-organization in many collective systems. And we can say that the system can be usefully described as self-organizing when global patterns of behaviors are product of interactions of its components. And usually we might have the feeling that emergence and self-organization go hand in hand, but when we look at them closely, actually they're opposites, in the sense that emergence is maximum when you have maximum information, and this would be maximum analogous to maximum entropy. And organization, whether it's self-organization or organization in general, implies an increase in order. So actually, we can define self-organization as the negative of entropy, which was normalized. It's normalized between 0 and 1. So the minimum self-organization would be maximum entropy and vice versa. So when you have, say, some random pattern, then there's no organization, and maximum organization is when you have a completely predictable pattern. And one thing that should be noticed is that when you measure a system, depending on the scale at which you make a measurement, this emergent self-organization and complexity can change. So again, there are many, perhaps much more notions and definitions and measures of complexity than emergence, but we can characterize complexity with interactions and also the balance between change and stability, a balance between emergence and self-organization. And I like very much this quote of Poincaré from turn of the 20th century, because I mean, this is precisely what characterizes complex systems. And I mean, perhaps complexity is not the best name for this measure, but one way of defining it would be to call it balanced complexity, because it's balance between emergence and self-organization, simply multiplying them. And here just shows the shapes of these measures as you increase the probability of having ones in a string. And I mean, we have applied these measures in many areas. The latest one is to the heterogeneity of random Boolean networks, and that's the Ising model. So we're interested in what's the effect of heterogeneity, and then the complexity can be seen as a proxy of criticality. So you expand the criticality of complex systems when you add different types of heterogeneity, and you also increase an anti-fragility. And we have a couple of recent papers on this. So just to wrap up, I mean, emergence is partially subjective, but we should better accept that rather than trying to either get an objective understanding of emergence or ignoring it because of its subjectivity. But I guess the question is, when is it useful? And of course, this is when we are interested in studying phenomena at different scales and what's new, which information is new at different scales, and which processes lead to that novel information. And of course, if we are interested in life and cognition, we have to include emergence, because naturally in living systems and in cognitive systems, we have information at certain scales that is not present at other scales. So if we want to understand life, we need to understand emergence. And maybe very probably this will require novel formalisms, because I mean, there are limited, the formalisms we use, let's say in traditional logics, are limited in certain ways, they're very powerful in other ways, but then maybe they're limiting, and we just need to explore new options. But if you're not subscribed, I invite you to subscribe to Complexity Digest, which is the official newsletter of the Complex Systems Society, and you will receive news of recent work and events on complex systems. So hopefully there will be time for questions.